Greetings, everyone. It's Annie Johnston here today. Apologies for Ananya not being around. Today is session 7 with Dr. Ravindra. So our topic today is from the Dhammapada. In this very body, you can discover all the demons and all the gods. I'll hand it over to you, Ravi.
I don't know whether I'm encountering demons or gods in front of me on the screen. Because as the Buddha said, in this very body, you can discover all the demons and all the gods. So all of us have all of these. So the question is how I look at people. Take a few moments now just to quieten our mind and watch what is taking place in your mind. It is a very natural tendency of the usual mind to be very mobile, connecting one association with another, something you heard, something you read, or even if nothing, somewhere, something could be thousands of miles away. How do I bring a little quietness to this mobile mind? In my own experience, it is very helpful to try to relate the mind or to try to connect it with the energy which is keeping my body alive. And as I have said this several times, this energy is not made by me. According to the various scriptures as well as all the sages, this is the divine energy keeping all the creatures alive. Just focusing on human beings for the present, this is what we end up calling soul. This divine energy, at whatever level it now is in me, that is the quality of my soul, but it wishes to evolve, wishes to return back to the source, to God. Therefore, it needs a body, including the mind, to have an instrument to assist its evolution. So first of all, there is no need to be against the body or the mind, but is it actually being an instrument of the soul, or is it doing its own thing? That is really the major call in any spiritual search, to look at oneself more and more impartially and deeply, and to see what takes my energy, my attention. Because this reminder from the Buddha, hardly a negligible sage, that each one of us in our body can discover all the demons and all the gods. The whole universe is manifested or mirrored inside us. So pay little attention to this energy which enters into us as breath. As long as this breath remains in this body, the body will survive. But when it leaves the body, that is the end of the body. But as I pay attention to the breath, it's helpful not to hold your breath outside or inside, and not intentionally trying to deepen it. But just as you become aware of it, it naturally deepens. And also a suggestion, remaining as relaxed as possible, simply because all our tensions arise either out of fear or some kind of self-assertion. So if I wish to connect with this spiritual energy, part of which is in me, but a great deal of it is above me, who I wish to invite to come into me, if I wish to connect with that spiritual energy, I need to be as relaxed as possible. That is what permits or invites receptivity. If I wish to receive some subtle energy, my body and mind need to be more and more receptive. That requires more and more relaxed. It is also helpful to find a posture which does not interfere with the movement of energy in the body. Assuming that something is able to descend into me, coming from above myself, through my head, so to maintain a little verticality without becoming rigid, so that this energy can go right into my body without being obstructed. But always very important to keep reminding oneself, it is not something that I can grab or command. I need to allow myself to be blessed by this energy. So internally, without necessarily using any words, intentionally breathing in through my skull with the intention of inviting this energy to come into me and placing my whole breath, my so-called out breath, into the whole of my body, right down to the toes, nourishing my whole organism. But even trying this little effort, don't become tense. It's not a question of conquering something. Remaining relaxed and not holding your breath outside or inside. I'm simply breathing in, welcoming this energy to enter into me, and placing this whole energy to the whole of my body so it can be nourished more and more. For most of us, it is a little easier when we focus on one limb at a time rather than placing my out breath into the whole of my body. I now intentionally place it in my right leg, sensing the energy in the right leg. Remembering this is divine energy keeping this leg alive. And then the left leg. Now I place my out breath into the whole of the pelvic area. Now into the abdomen, preferably slightly below the navel, which is the center of gravity of the body. For some of you who are familiar with the Zen practice, that gets called hara. Between the eyes, slightly above the eyes. Now I turn my attention to my right arm, placing my out breath in my right arm, whole of the arm from the shoulder to the fingertips. Sensing the energy in the arm. Each of our limbs is amazing in its capacity. There is absolutely no possibility of myself creating this limb, any limb. Left arm. For 2 or 3 breaths, I place my out breath in my whole back, from the neck to the base of the spine, maintaining a helpful posture without bending. Now I place my out breath into my head, watching if I sense more space or clarity in the head, or has it become more confused and darkened. Not easily to accept anything, but to see if it applies to me. Now we take 3 more breaths and placing our out breath into the whole of our body from the top of the head to the toes without rushing. We'll focus today on this remark of the Buddha in this famous book, Dhammapada. Dham is the Pali way of saying dharma. In this very body, you can discover all the demons and all the gods. If the Buddha could find all the demons and all the gods in his body, sure as hell each one of us has all the demons and potentially all the gods. And therefore, constantly trying to see whether I am being driven by the devils or demons in me or by the divine aspect in me. First of all, a few general remarks. In principle, the whole external cosmos, including the divine and the devil, is mirrored inside each human being. Each one of us is a hologram of the whole universe. And this remark of Rumi, some of you are familiar with it. Everything in the universe is within you. Ask all from yourself. If you have not yet seen the devil, go look in the mirror. So maybe after you finish this seminar today, you can go look in the mirror if you want to see the devil. That's Rumi's remark. If you have not yet seen the devil, go look in the mirror. The objective universe cannot exist without both the positive and the negative forces. Which is why this remark of the Buddha, in this very body, you can discover all the demons and all the gods. And then I have quoted here a remark from the Gospel of Philip. For so long as the root of wickedness is hidden, it is strong. But when it is recognized, it is dissolved. When it is revealed, it perishes. So you see the reason why I need to become more and more aware of the demons in me. Very helpful suggestion from the Gospel of Philip. As long as I'm not aware of it, this wickedness or the devilishness remains hidden and it is strong. But when it is recognized, it is dissolved. And when it is revealed deeply, strongly, it perishes. So even the Buddha actually recognized the devil in him before he was enlightened. In fact, one of his remarks is Mara. Mara is the Pali word for demon. I'll come to that in a minute. Mara, you are a part and parcel of myself. This is the remark of the Buddha. But a part and parcel of himself doesn't mean that that part has to be ruling him. As he becomes more and more aware of this, in a manner of speaking, it perishes. It may still be there, but it is not in control. A devil is the personification of evil as it is conceived in various cultures and religious traditions. It is seen as the objectification of a hostile and destructive force. In Christianity, the devil or Satan is a fallen angel. Remember, Lucifer was the highest of all angels. Literally, Lucifer means the bearer of light, a light carrier. He was the highest of all angels. Then Prophet Isaiah actually describes why he was expelled from heaven, because he wished to be like the Most High. He wished to be like God. And in the whole of the Abrahamic tradition, that is completely forbidden. Anybody who said that or tried that, like Christ saying, the Father and I are one, is crucified. In Islam, Al-Hallaj, a very great mystic, said something very similar, and he was also crucified. So in Christianity, the devil or Satan is a fallen angel who is the primary opponent of God. Christianity describes Satan as a fallen angel who terrorizes the world through evil, is opposed to truth, and shall be condemned together with the fallen angels, who with him to eternal fire at the last judgment. Now, it's curious, it's rather different expressions of this in the Bible. For example, I invite you to read the book of Job. First two chapters repeat the same sentence. And the sentence is, when all the sons of God were gathered together, among them was Satan. He's also a son of God. He didn't create himself. And God then asks him, this is much more strongly expressed in the book of Job than any other biblical text. Then God actually asks him to test Job, who is claiming to be a great follower of God. So his whole purpose is to test. And if you look at any of the prophets, Abraham, Moses, Christ, Muhammad, all the prophets were tested by Satan or devil. I'll just mention some of these words get interchangeably used. Lucifer, Satan, Beelzebub, devil. These words get interchangeably used. And so all the prophets are tested by the devil. And therefore, I highly recommend to you, first of all, not to be against the devil or the Satan. It's being against your examiner. He'll flunk you if you become against him. You have to honor this devil and to see how can you be, in a way, not to be against him, but free of his domination over you. That's really the call. In mainstream Christianity, the devil is usually referred to as Satan. In the Bible, the devil is identified as the dragon and the old serpent. I have given many references here if you're interested in this, but most of my friends don't seem to be especially interested in any of this. But if you are, you have precise references here. So the dragon or the old serpent, as the prince of this world, or the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience, and the God of this world. Always a tendency that the real God is God of the heavenly world, and the devil is God or controller of this ordinary world. He's also identified as the tempter of Jesus. Satan is traditionally identified as the serpent who convinced Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. Thus, Satan has been depicted as a serpent. Here is a painting by William Blake in which you can see this serpent bound all around Eve. Is that fairly clear visibly? The biblical traditions are prophetic in nature. I trust you understand what I mean by that. Prophetic meaning the initiative is taken by God. Nobody mentions that Moses was searching for something, or Abraham was searching for something, or Jesus was searching for something, or Muhammad. So God, as it were, holds somebody by the scruff of their neck, and they have no choice but to obey God. Literally, the word prophet means ruler. And sorry, prophet actually literally means instrument. So all the prophets in the Bible are instruments of divine will. They are not necessarily searching for it. That tendency is very strongly expressed in the Indian tradition. For example, the Buddha spent many years searching for something, studying something. Or similarly, in contemporary times, you can look at Ramana or Aurobindo or Vivekananda. They're searching for something. I will soon point out some of the other differences, but here, this is one main thing here. So the biblical traditions are prophetic in nature, and the initiative is taken by God, who instructs a chosen prophet to undertake some activities. The prophet, which literally means an instrument, has no choice. In the Indian traditions, which are mystical in nature, the spiritual activity begins from the searchers, and some among them truly rise towards realizing the identity of their deepest self with the One. Extremely few, but that is the call. However, in all the traditions, there is a strong assertion that a person will be tested and examined by a strong satanic forces sent from above in the biblical tradition and emerging from the psyche of the searcher in the Indian tradition. So one needs to be clear that in the biblical tradition, Satan is sent from above by God to test. And the book of Job is the perfect example of this, and I recommend to you to read it carefully. Whereas in the Indian tradition, the negative forces are arising from within your own psyche inside. So they're not being sent from above. Here, there are a few standard words in Sanskrit. You don't need to get stuck with them, but if you come across them, you should know. Asura, in the earliest hymns of the Rig Veda, originally meant any supernatural spirit, either good or bad. In ancient Hinduism, devas, which are also called Adityas, and asuras, which are also called Daityas, are half brothers, sons of the same father, Kashyap, but different mothers. Here I have given Kashyap is the common father of Diti and Aditi, but these words mean something. Kashyap means vision, Diti means limited. So the Daityas, which you would call demons, are children of limited vision. And Adityas are children of larger vision. One can also see this in our contemporary world. This is easy to understand. So both in the whole of the Indian mythology, the battle or the struggle is not between us and them. It is always between us one and us two. Both of those aspects are within ourselves. Here is a good example of this. Both the demons and the angels, if you like, or the gods or devas, have a common father. Similarly, in the Mahabharata, the battle is between cousins or teachers and students. So it's not somebody outside there, completely different from us. And also very strong suggestion, there is a great myth, I don't have time to go into this now here, called the myth of the churning ocean, in which both the Daityas and the Adityas, or the demons and the angels, are required to actually look deeply into our consciousness. It's the ocean of consciousness which is being churned, and they discover many things in the process. But both of them are required. And then it becomes, from painting point of view, that the daityas or the demons get represented by this kind of style, as you can see here. And the devas, the adityas, get represented by this kind of style, different style. So this becomes part of the cultural way of representing them. But Rakshasa literally means harm to be guarded against. Daitya literally means child of limited vision, as I just said. Asura is one who is wholly self-occupied. But all of these three, Daitya, Asura, and Rakshasa, all three get translated into English as demon. So if you come across, read any of the texts coming from India, and they would use the word demon for all these three. But these three actually have a slightly different background, different meaning, but that's partly part of the trouble with the translation. Mara, which is more or less the equivalent of the Satan, in Buddhism is a malignant celestial king, an asura, who tried to stop Prince Siddhartha from achieving enlightenment. Mara is not like the Christian Satan. He's neither any kind of counterpart to God, nor is he an agent sent by God to test someone. Mara is mostly psychological. The psychological forces which we have within us. Mara is a representation of inner temptations, mainly one's ego, that obstruct the path to enlightenment. Therefore, overcoming Mara is equivalent to overcoming the ego self. Slightly different kind of focus, but at a common level, they both seem to more or less mean the same in every culture. Mara tests a searcher's freedom from desire and fear. The Pali Sutras represent the unenlightened people as possessed by the demons of desire and craving. These two self-destructive feelings then cause the images of horrifying demons. In a state of enlightenment, the Buddha overcame such passions and by that conquered the demon Mara. So these are the two main things, possessed by desire and craving. The other aspect is fear, which is the other side of I desire something and then I expect not to get it. That creates a kind of a fear. Now, as I said earlier, that this expression actually appears even in the oldest Rig Veda, our oldest Veda, which is the Rig Veda, where it is not given necessarily a negative feeling to this. But now Mara is seen as the power of temptation, the tendency towards evil, moral conflict, and the influence of such factors as indolence, negligence, and niggardliness. Mara is described as the evil one, or simply the evil, calumnious or malicious, and bestower of all worldly lust. Mara is understood as a personification of temptation. So gradually over the centuries, slight different change. Now here we look at a few slides how even Jesus was tested by Satan. First of all, as it is described, I have given you precise references here. He, referring to Jesus, fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was hungry. I'm always surprised somebody fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. Try it for just 4 days and 4 nights. You can then see where you stand. And afterwards he was hungry. The tempter approached and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become loaves of bread." You see the temptation to try your power. If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become loaves of bread. And this is the remark of Christ. Christ said in reply, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes forth from the mouth of God." So he clearly doesn't follow the temptation. Then the devil took him to the holy city and made him stand on the parapet of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and with their hands they will support you, lest you dash your foot against a stone." See again, well, if you're the Son of God, you can just fall down and the angels will come and protect you. Jesus answered him, "Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." By the way, all the three synoptic gospels actually mention these temptations by Satan, slightly different phraseology. I have decided here to use only the Gospel of Matthew so that there is a consistency. Then the devil took him up to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in their magnificence. And he said to him, "All these I shall give to you if you will prostrate yourself and worship me." See, sovereignty over the whole world. Jesus said to him, "Get thee behind me, Satan. For it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve." I often try to remind my friends that Christ didn't ask him to go to hell or to disappear. Satan has a lot of energy, a lot of power. So Christ asked him to help from behind. Get thee behind me, Satan. You can read this carefully in the Gospels. Then the devil left him, and angels came and ministered to him. So you see, power, special occult powers, turning the stones into food, for example, and power over the angels coming to protect him if he's falling down, and then power over the whole cosmos, give you sovereignty over the whole world. Mara, in the Buddhist tradition, says, "For 7 years I pursued Gautama." By the way, I should remind you here, in Pali it is written as Gautam, as Gotama. In Sanskrit it is written Gautama. So sometimes you see one spelling, sometimes another, don't get mixed up. It's two slightly different languages. Pali is derived from Sanskrit, but relatively speaking more modern. Mara says, "First 7 years I pursued Gautama at every step, yet with the wakeful Buddha I got no chance." Then he gives a very interesting analogy here. As a crow that hopped around a fat-colored stone, thinking we may find a tender delicacy, flies away in disappointment. In disgust, I give up Gautama. So the analogy he gives about this crow, which is looking for some delicacy in a stone, and he can't find it. So this is his analogy. He can't find Gautama interested in food. Then Mara sends his own daughters. Sometimes it is said 3 daughters, sometimes 7 daughters. But I thought this painting looked rather nicer to me, so I thought I'd show it to you. So Mara's daughters seek to lure Siddhartha Gautam. See, here Gautam is written as in Sanskrit text. By using dance, song, music, and their sweet talk as their arsenal to generate lust in the Buddha's mind. The Buddha shows not the slightest interest in it. Although I should also remind you, this is not my remark, this is in the Buddhist tradition. Apparently, the Buddha said that if there was one other force as strong as sex, he's not sure he would have made it. Clearly, I mean, I hardly need to convince you people how strong force the sex is. None of us will be existing here without somebody having sex. Look at the whole of nature, trees, animals, human beings, everything. It survives, it arrives through sexual intercourse. So the force is extremely strong. The whole manifested universe is driven by this force. So this remark of the Buddha that if there was one other force as strong as sex, he's not sure he would have made it. Then Mara said to Gautam, I will turn this mountain into a mountain of gold and give it to you if you will submit to me. How much money do you need to betray any idea? I have tried to ask myself, certainly a few million will do in my case, $few million. Whole mountain of gold. Even Musk or Trump could be tempted by that, I guess. Then Gautama said, I was a prince and, this is Buddha's response. Gautama said, I was a prince and I gave up my future kingdom. Don't try to interfere with my search by offering a mountain of gold. Move away from me. Then Mara said to Gautama, I will give you sovereignty over the whole world if you will submit to me. This was exactly the remark of Satan to Christ. I'll give you sovereignty over the whole world. It just gets depicted in different traditions slightly differently. And Gautama said, Mara, it is more important for me to have sovereignty over my whole self. That will give me power over you as well, since you are a part and parcel of myself. Then Mara tries to attack him. Remember, desire, the other side is fear. So he tries to attack him, and that is also represented in many different paintings. I just selected one of them. But the Buddha sits there quietly in meditation. According to Madame Blavatsky, the Daityas are demons in an adverse sense. In truth, they are identical with certain intellectual gods and opponents of meaningless rituals. They are antagonizing blind forces in nature, expressed as reaction, opposition, and contrast, evil for some, good for others. They play an important role in discovering the concealed psychological weakness of neophytes before they qualify for initiation in hidden mysteries. In the Theosophical literature, very strong tendency or strong emphasis that certain kind of weaknesses or certain hindrances have to be overcome before you qualify to be initiated in the more hidden mysteries. So, Madame Blavatsky just pointing out that these demons are the ones who are actually testing you for those forces. It is a common human tendency to forget the presence of the spiritual element in oneself, the real I or the self, demanding a periodic recollection of one's raison d'etre. Raison d'etre simply means the reason for my existence. All of us are mostly driven by the desires and fears of our ordinary, worldly, or ego self. But there is no need to be against one's ordinary self. It is necessary for one's existence on the planet. Yesterday, I have made this reminder, a very important reminder from Madame Jean de Solman. Ego is a good servant, but a bad master. So there is no reason to be against the ego. It is required to do many things to even survive on the planet. But if it begins to take over, that's where it becomes the master. That's where the problem comes. Although different expressions may be used in different cultural contexts, basically what all the searches will be examined about is their attachment to pleasure, wealth, and power, and their fear of loss, disapproval, and death. Both sides, attachments or fears, belong to our body and mind, not to the spiritual element in us, which has taken on our body and mind as the necessary instrument to assist its evolution. Again, I remind you, in the Bhagavad Gita, this spiritual element which has taken on our body is simply called the embodied one who is in the body. But sometimes other words get used like Atma, or in the general English context, we would use the word soul. So these forces of fear or disapproval, fear or desire, they all belong to the body and the mind, not to the soul. Both Mara in Pali and Satan in Hebrew mean obstacle. They indicate what stands in our way and whether we have enough strength and understanding to overcome these obstacles. It is not helpful to be against the devil who is trying to test us. We need to face our devil and practice overcoming the obstacles indicated by him or her or it, whatever gender you attach to the devil. In different cultures, different genders get attached. So the devil is simply pointing out the obstacles in us. The call to each human being, in fact, to each creature, at least in the Indian tradition especially, is to discover within oneself the highest or the subtlest level and to become one with it. The transformation of consciousness which is called for is not about changing the contents of consciousness from bad to good, but to have a structural change leading to a state beyond time, beyond thought, beyond good and evil. Yesterday, I had quoted this remark of Krishna from the 10th chapter in the Bhagavad Gita. I am splendor of the splendid, wisdom of the wise, but also the cunning of the cheats. So both so-called good and evil, one needs to go beyond altogether, beyond thought, and then beyond time. For example, this famous remark of Christ. This is in the 8th chapter, 58th verse in John's Gospel. Before Abraham was, I am. And so obviously this is unacceptable from ordinary point of view. So the very next verse says, then they pick up stones to try to kill him. But each person's spiritual journey is unique. And each one of us has to follow our unique journey in the light of one's spiritual and cultural background, what one has understood and what calls one. We can learn from great teachers and scriptures, but we cannot follow exactly their journey. For example, all the Buddhist monks in Tibet eat meat just because there are not enough vegetables there to survive. But all the Buddhist monks in India, none of them eat meat. So one has to not try to obey this or that. And I think I mentioned the other day that one Zen monk in California started wearing jeans, which will surprise any other Zen follower anywhere else, wearing jeans. But this is why I especially like this remark of Matsuo Basho, a 16th century great haiku writer, 17th century. Oh, excuse me. Seek not to follow in the footsteps of the wise ones of old. Seek what they sought. This is one of my favorite remarks by Basho. Seek not to follow in the footsteps of the wise ones of old. Seek what they sought. Each of us needs to have our absolutely unique journey. Now, this is not because Christ did exactly this, that's what I need to do. Or the Buddha did this, no, it's impossible in any case. So I have an exercise I'm suggesting to you if you wish to spend at least a few minutes on it. What is your obstacle in spiritual search? What stands in your way? Is your Satan offering pleasure or wealth or power? And how do you struggle with your Satan? And as always, I point out that you can, of course, go to my website and find many articles, etc. there. And also I have my email address here. Is Annie recording all this?
I started us recording.
Okay, well, I think this remark of the Buddha is not a good idea to easily dismiss this. Namely, that in each one of us, there are all the gods and all the demons. And then he even acknowledges himself that, Mara, you are a part and parcel of myself. But just like Christ, get thee behind me, Satan, not to try to lead me. So who actually sees some force in themselves, which we may associate with the devil, which is usually to do with pleasure or with wealth or possession and power. These are the three main forces. And then the fear. Usually fear gets associated with death, but sometimes with just disease or accident or... Walter, would you bring something to say? Or really anybody else wishes to bring something in a way?
I can bring
yes.
a quick reflection. Yeah, I just really have resonated a lot with the talk today. For a little history on me and background, I'm a recovering addict and alcoholic. So I've spent more than half of my life struggling with that. Started at a very young age for me. And I feel that the addiction that tends to lead towards drugs, sex, these sorts of things really pulls on both fears and desires for people. So I just noticed that to be very strong and very big in the world today. Um, and just a few other little notes I wrote down. When I was really young, like, under 3 years old, just starting to learn to speak, my mom always brings this up, but I would say things like, there's this darkness in me, there's a dark force in me. And it was just kind of startling for her to hear that from such a young child. But I feel like I've always felt this way, that there are both demons and gods in us, or the potential to see that. My dad would always say that I'm like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So that I've got these two forces that have always been controlling. Um, and then another just brief memory I had was of a really good friend of mine's mother telling me when I was also quite young, but a little bit older, that she sees these big angel wings coming off my shoulders. And so I have all these moments in life where I kind of have these snapshots of both demons, and I would never say that I have a god or I am a god or anything like that, but something that's more luminous and light as well that's been around. Um, so anyways, yeah, I just feel that throughout my lifetime, I've gone to school and I've also been incarcerated. So I've just always had these two forces there. And I think being aware of them, and maybe now through yoga, feeling like Satan is behind me more as opposed to in front of me leading the way. Um, yeah, I guess just I really do feel that this tends to be uh, the two forces that are really strong and at play for me and for a lot of people.
Yes. Just slight linguistic remark. You were sort of hesitant about saying, I'm not God. What gets translated from Sanskrit or Pali as God into English, the Sanskrit word is Deva. Sometimes it's difficult to describe this in using an appropriate English language. Sometimes one may say it's like angel or higher levels, but it's the word Deva. Then it gets translated often as God, and then they say, oh, Hinduism has polytheistic tendency. There is all this, therefore it's one way of criticizing it, that Christianity is monotheistic and Hinduism is polytheistic. But the word which is being translated as God is Deva, just to remind you of this. Yes, I see two people have their hands raised. Is Wade there? Or maybe Carol, you speak first since you're right there on.
It's ready.
Yes, I'm in the audience here, Ravi. So,
Okay.
yeah, it seems that in some people, the deva or the spiritual higher dimension is very evident. And there's the phenomenon that people talk about charisma, that some people seem to have charisma. And there's certainly a positive charisma, but also, of course, there's also a negative charisma. It seems the asuras or the satanic aspect seems to manifest sometimes as charisma. So would you like to speak about not only the personal aspect of light and darkness in each of us, but also this seems to be a kind of power in some people and maybe in culture of a kind of charisma. However, whatever that term.
Yes. No, it's very strong emphasis, especially actually in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, that certain practices lead to occult powers. And we certainly associate this with practically all the sages, that Christ could touch somebody and cure them. And in modern times, I think I mentioned yesterday or day before yesterday that Krishnamurti, even on one occasion, was saying to me, they say that the speaker had some occult powers. And that may be true. So he wasn't even denying this necessarily, but he wasn't forcing on it. But occult power basically meaning something unexpected of any kind of an ordinary situation. So, but occult power then can be used for self-control or controlling others, or it can also be used for controlling oneself. So in all spiritual traditions, strong emphasis, and again, as I said, in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, very strongly emphasized, that one needs to be not attached to these occult powers, although it is inevitably the case that as one practices yoga more and more seriously and deeply, one acquires certain powers. And in a way, one does not even need to look at it, occult power, in any kind of a imaginary sense. Every great writer or scientist obviously has some special powers which others don't have. So the question then is, are they being used for good or for bad? And therefore, always a very strong suggestion from the spiritual teachers, one does not need to be against occult powers, but one does not need to get so attached to it, because it interferes, as Patanjali actually explicitly says, it begins to interfere with one's connection with Purusha if you get so attached to the occult powers. So to require a certain detachment, or vairagya is his expression, from these occult powers. But there is no need to deny this. I personally, for example, I can assure you, there were occasions when my teacher, Jean de Salzman, could practically look inside me, what is going on in my mind, they say before I even used any words. So how do they know this? As if they are able to look inside somebody or to even know what they're about to say or won't say. So I don't think we need to be denying the possibility of occult powers, but to get too attached to it is not recommended. Carol, do you wish to bring something?
I do.
Please do.
I wanted to continue to talk about Mara a little and go back to something that you said yesterday. I mean, for me, Mara takes the form often of failed intentions. And yesterday you spoke about one way of handling that, sort of failing to do what one sets out to do, might take the form of small deprivations. And this seemed to me odd. I wanted you to explain a little more about that. It seemed like I couldn't think of anything that, for example, would along in the line of failed intentions that would help to put Mara behind me.
Well, I don't know about the word moral or immoral, but question
No,
really.
no, I said Mara, not moral.
I see.
No. I was saying that for me, the way Mara operates is in the realm of failed intentions.
Yes.
I say I'm going to do something, and then I don't. And yesterday you were suggesting kind of mild deprivation as a way of dealing with that. And it didn't seem to me, I couldn't think of anything in that realm that would be effective. So I was interested in your experience with that.
Now, you see the language. You just said, I try to do something, then I don't. You use the word I. In both cases, it's the mind which decides to do something, and it's the body which refuses to do it. So if one becomes a little clear that we have more than one forms of energy in us, then one actually can seriously ask the question, how do I discipline my body? Or should I just keep following it, whatever it wants to do? And in general, the body and also the ordinary mind, but within the mind, there are occasionally one looks at it slightly from a deeper or a higher level. So we end up using two different words for mind, certainly in Sanskrit or also in ancient Greek. The trouble is, these days we just end up using one word, and that itself creates a confusion. So people like Krishnamurti would say intelligence beyond thought. Now that's also part of the mind, but ordinary thinking is one level of the mind. Intelligence beyond thought is another level of the mind. Or Gurdjieff uses the terminology lower mind and higher mind. So, but the reason I'm saying this, when you say, I decided something, what is deciding it or who is deciding it? And then who is it that doesn't carry it out? And one gradually begins to see that within each one of us, there are different, if you like, there are different aspects of myself or different energies in myself or different. So question really is, one can make a nice New Year's resolution and a few days later one forgets all about it. So then the suggestion is that the body is the one who wants to get carried away with its own needs and desires, and it needs to be disciplined. It's not a question of punishing it or anything like this, but how do you discipline it? Either saying, well, if you follow it, then I'll reward you, or if you don't follow it, then I will deprive you of something. So that suggestion that I made yesterday, if you decide that every day I'm going to read one page at least of a book that engages me or interests me, or somebody even says it's very important for me to study, supposing I agree to this, or somebody you respect, and or you call your teacher. The words, we don't need to get stuck with one word or the other. But if somebody who recommends to you a book that you think I would like to actually follow this, your mind happily decides this. Then the body needs to be disciplined. And so this is what I was suggesting, that in case I don't read what I decided to do, supposing I decided that I'm going to read at least one page of this book every day, and if I don't read it, then how do I discipline my body to remember it next day to read it? So one doesn't need to be therefore against the body. All of these are instruments. It's a question of, if you actually have ever worked in a workshop with many instruments, each instrument needs to be understood carefully and used carefully and studied. Otherwise, it can be badly used. The instrument can be destroyed, which is also the reason I mentioned yesterday. There is no suggestion to terrorize the body, but more to discipline it. But if this doesn't speak to you, this is perfectly fine. I mean, I'm not trying to get some points in heaven by convincing you of something or the other. I'm just telling you what certainly my teacher very strongly emphasized to me, which was namely that the body often does not follow what the mind decides, and to bring them together is necessary so that become more and more an integrated person, a whole person. Anybody else wishes to bring something? A question or an insight or objection, which is also possible.
Walter, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, Ravi, for not responding before, but I saw two hands already raised, so I wanted to wait till the others were. The concept that you presented of Mara and Satan as obstacles in my way is for me very helpful, because in my Christian education I received as a child, the devil was something that was connected with my behavior. Every kind of behavior that was considered as bad was taken as the devil inside me.
I see.
And this devil had even to be beaten out by physical force. So this kind of Christian education was for me, one thing I never could really accept, even as a child, because I, at that time, didn't see anything bad in my behavior. So I couldn't understand why I got a beating for it. But realizing now that these things are obstacles in my way,
Yes.
makes the understanding much better and gives me a point of access of overcoming it, of working with it.
Yes. I actually have, obviously, living in Canada, I have many friends of Christian background. One particular one I wanted to mention, she's actually from England, was brought up in the Catholic tradition, which is a little different focus than from the Protestant. And according to her, when they were school girls, they were just, the suggestion was that each one of them naturally, every day, has some sins.
Mm.
Just the very fact that you're born of Adam and Eve and they had sinned, so you inherit what they call the original sin
Mm.
just from birth. And then for them to go skiing, they had to admit to the priest what their sin is, and who would then tell them how many Hail Marys they have to say to be free of the sin before they can go skiing. So she said that she and her friend would decide, well, this week you say this is the sin, and next week I'll say this is the sin, because they have to say something that their sin. And then they will be allotted a certain number of Hail Marys to say, and then they can go skiing. So you see what becomes of religious practice. In a way, there is no shortage of sin in anybody, but how to understand sin. I often remind people that every book in the New Testament is initially written in Greek. The word for sin in Greek literally means missing the mark. Amaratya. That's the Greek word. Then if I become at all clear what my mark is or what my goal is, and if I'm missing that, that's the sin. Then one actually recognizing it, one would come back to this again and again, wishing to see how I can actually correspond to what is my aim, what is my mark. The word mark can be aim, my destination. The different words can be used as a translation of the word amaratya. And therefore, one needs to really see more and more what becomes at an ordinary level in the name of religion. It just, makes it cheaper and cheaper. Not trying to get into any depth of trying to understand what one's sin is, how actually to try to understand this, to be careful is to see how I can be free of this. What stands in my way? That is really what the sin is. What is stopping me to follow my goal, my aim? Then it just gets attached to it. And then somebody, actually a well-known Christian theologian, he was even a monk, as a matter of fact, wrote a book trying to disagree with the original sin. He called it original blessing. And he was excommunicated because it doesn't correspond to the church notion.
Yeah.
So it's a tragedy, really, what takes place in there.
Thank you.
I see Latit, I may not be pronouncing your name rightly.
Letitia.
Huh.
Yes, I'm always going back to the concept of the seven deadly sins as I learned them ages and ages ago in Catholic school. And that's one thing I remember from that education that I find valuable. And that is that these sins are basically exaggerations of normal human and valid human conditions, like, for example, gluttony. You have to eat, but to go overboard with it is the sin, but also the lack of it, that is to starve yourself, like someone who deliberately starves themselves to look beautiful or something like that, or eats and then throws up. Anyway, all of those are just, it's kind of like exaggerations of a basic human need. So it's helpful to me anyway to think of it more as achieving balance than anything else.
No, I think what you're saying is helpful. Also making slightly general remarks, especially Christian theologians, particularly in the Middle Ages, there was much argument about what is the greatest sin. And often they would say pride is the greatest sin. But in general, the overall emphasis was that the greatest sin is despair. Because despair means I no longer really believe that the Holy Spirit can do anything. From their point of view, despair was a way of saying no conviction in the Holy Spirit. And that was regarded as the greatest sin, despair. So don't lose hope. Keep. Carol, please speak.
When Satan tempted Jesus to jump off the cliff
Yes.
because he would be saved, he said no. When an evil man asked Buddha to chop off his head, he did it. Is there a basic difference in because it's the same thing, someone evil asking you to do something dangerous, and one's like, sure, and the other one says no. So I'm just curious if that's a kind of a fundamental difference in the points of view.
What did you say, that the Buddha chopped his head?
Yeah, an evil man came to the Buddha and asked him to chop off his head, and he just did. Now his head grew back.
Well,
So-
I'm, first of all, not aware of this, and I'm a little surprised by this, because the Buddha, from whatever one reads about him or is said about him, was practically the embodiment of compassion. So that he would actually take the head off somebody surprises me.
No, his own head.
He took his own head off?
He took his own head off and it grew back. And he did it because the man asked for it.
Well, so that is a very strange kind of power to have. So then, now tell me then, what is your question? At least I understand.
So the fundamental difference in Satan saying jump off the cliff and Jesus saying no because I don't want to test God. And then Buddha having someone evil asking him to chop off his head and him doing it. Maybe he didn't see it as God testing him. Maybe he saw it as compassion. This man wants my head, I'll give it to him. I find the whole story, the Buddha story, confusing anyway, I think is probably the main thing.
Well, I must say I'm a bit surprised to hear this, but this is fine. On the other hand, every person's not only journey is unique, but also how they correspond to any particular test, etc., is quite different and unique. So in this case, I imagine, now this is just imagination on my part, I obviously don't know that if somebody had asked Christ also, can you cut your head off and will it come back again? He might have done that, but it's a question of that story doesn't seem to arise in the Christian context. Personally, I haven't heard this in the Buddhist context either, but since you mention it, maybe it is there. Every tradition has very large amount of material. And to imagine that I know something about Christ's teaching or the Buddha's teaching is very minor, very small amount. So in a way, each sage is different, and they are being questioned differently and asked differently. Many things are common, but overall, one would say it's really trying to tempt them or to frighten them. And temptation can be in terms of pleasure or power or wealth. Those are the usual means of temptation. And fear is death or damage or wounded, being wounded or hurt. That's the fear. So, but each one would have a unique aspect of that. Andrea, you wish to say something?
Yes, thank you. So I was listening to an interview with Father Richard Rohr this morning, and he was talking about, he's done a lot of teaching in Germany, and he was explaining that apparently a lot of the churches in Germany have, I know you've talked about St. George, but apparently they have depictions of Archangel Michael, usually somewhere behind the main altar, slaying a dragon or, slaying some dragon version of Satan. And, but he said his friend, who was a translator, would take him to some other churches that would have like a small vestibule or a small altar off to the side. And behind that altar, there would be a depiction of Saint Martha petting the dragon. And that made me think about, I wanted to ask you about like this idea of shadow and like working with one's shadow in terms of like the get thee behind me Satan aspect of it, and like embracing, not necessarily embracing, but not fully rejecting those parts of ourselves because they are part of ourselves. And that's what that story about Martha made me think.
Yes, you see, again, expressions are tricky because, for example, get thee behind me can mean, although literally stand behind me, or it can mean don't be the overpowering force in me. For example, when Christ says to unless you leave yourself behind, that doesn't mean he wants to kill yourself. But leaving behind meaning not to be so occupied with it, not to be totally driven by it. So the word, everything that we say in any language is not only the problem in English, it's the same thing in Hindi or Sanskrit, or I imagine in German. Same expression can have many different meanings possible attached to this. So the remark of having the Satan behind you, it can also mean to be free of the Satan, but it can also mean that he can help you from behind and not lead you, not be becoming the leader. Now you see again, even what does leader mean? Just somebody ahead of you or somebody is actually teaching you something. So you see each of these words has different meanings and depends on where we focus on it.
Sounds just like what we were talking about yesterday with not being against the ego, but finding the ego's right place.
Yes.
And when you were talking about the different English translations that all the Sanskrit words that end up as demon, the one that stood out to me today was one who is wholly self-occupied. And I think that's one way that is translated into English as demon. And I thought that was really interesting because it's like that describes the version of putting the ego in front, right? Being wholly self-occupied. And the three different stories that you told about the temptation of Jesus, like those were all example, like Satan was using egotistical temptations, show me how powerful you are by turning the stones to bread, and so I think at least the stories in that tradition, it's interesting that they're so wholly egoic rather than necessarily about, property or wealth.
And also just the expressions there. Satan is always saying to him, since you say you are son of God, or they say that you are son of God, therefore show me this. Now, that expression doesn't appear in the Buddhist literature. Nobody is saying to the Buddhas, because you are son of God. You see, so it partly depends on, in the whole of the Christian tradition, very strong emphasis that there is only one Son of God, Christ. Although Christ himself repeatedly says you can read this actually the 10th or the 11th verse in the first chapter of John's Gospel. He says, everybody who's born of the Spirit is a child of God. So, and yesterday I had quoted from the letter to the Hebrews, something very similar remark. So from the perspective of the church organization, there is only one Son of God, nobody else. And also I actually try to remind my Christian friends particularly, remember this is a remark actually in the Bible, in the New Testament, that Christ is accused by some of the Pharisees that he's destroying the tradition. And he says, I have come not to destroy the tradition, but to fulfill it. Which is the tradition he's fulfilling? Not the Christian tradition, that didn't exist. It's the Jewish tradition that he's fulfilling. So Christ's teaching is the fulfillment of the Jewish tradition. According to Christ himself. This is his quotation, this is not my remark. I have come not to destroy the tradition, but to fulfill it. To imagine that he's fulfilling Christian tradition would be completely silly. This word did not even exist at that time when he made this remark. He's fulfilling the Jewish tradition. But all this can be. But then soon after that, for political reason, the Jews and the Christians are fighting with each other. Christians take over, so they try to destroy the Jews. And then you can see this, especially in the Nazi era, that's the height of it. All the Nazis are regarding themselves as Christians. And what are they trying to do? Is to destroy the Jews completely. So you can see what goes on. And very tragic. This is the reason I keep repeatedly saying that to look at any of the tradition at the mass level is not very helpful. It requires looking at it more and more subtly. I had shown you that image of the Saint killing the dragon. It's his own head that he's offering to Christ. That's the dragon. But that's not the way it ever gets represented. Rarely. That was actually from a particular Serbian monastery on Mount Athos that showed that. Do you recall that? I showed that, I think, 2 or 3 days back.